talking. So I wanted to start with your parents, actually. You know, I want to talk about the Holocaust and the survival. So Dad in the resistance, and Mum, you know, Mum's experiences before she ran away.
Right. She was actually technically in the resistance too as a kid. She was when they had. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, we'll start with Dad coming from Germany to France. Start with that.
Okay, so he in 1933 he was enrolled in Humboldt University, which was Berlin University then. It's called Humboldt now. It was one of the finest universities in Europe, and he was enrolled in the medical faculty. He was going to be a doctor, and then in 1933, when Hitler came to power, one of the first things the Nazis did was sack or fire all the Jewish professors and students in all universities. One of the first things he did. And so my dad was in that first round of Jewish kids being fired, being sacked, being told to leave. But the interesting thing is I went to the university and I was researching this, and I found the documents showing that my dad was not there anymore. But there's a punchline to this, because the reason they gave for him not being eligible anymore in the university was Gunther Morawski could not prove he was Aryan. That's what it says, and that's so Nazi, you know. It's so twisted.
It's so weird, because they were still looking for an excuse back then. I mean, you know, to isolate the Jewish people. So they were still trying to justify it in some sort of way.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, as you know, at the end they didn't care less. But
no, at that point, but the thing is, you know, how do you prove you're Aryan?
Yeah.
Maybe you're circumcised. I don't know. Maybe you're not circumcised. I mean, but anyway, so his father told him to get out of Berlin because the stormtroopers had come to their house in Leipzig, looking for him, and because he was on a list of Jewish students, and the reason he was on the list. They knew he was Jewish, but he had got up in geography class in the school in Leipzig, and in geography class, he suggested to the professor that Germany should join the British Empire. Well, there was a Nazi kid in the room, and he went home, told his dad, and like shortly after that, in the Völkische Beobachter, which was the Nazi newspaper, there was a little story, proof of the worldwide Jewish conspiracy. Jew Gunther Morawski suggests we join the Empire. And that's all part of the Jewish conspiracy. So anyway, he knew there were signals. So he fled to Paris in 1933, and he was in. This is the short version, and he was in Paris till the Germans invaded Paris, which I guess is 1939. I guess
1940.
Yeah, a little later, and so he. By then he could speak French. He looked French, and he had fake ID. The resistance gave him his ID, and interestingly enough, the ID. This shows you how well we know the Nazis were nuts, but this is particularly nutsy. That in passports now we have eye color, we have hair color, we have height, but they also had nose size in the passport, in your ID, and French NEZ,
yeah,
NEZ, and it had normal, or in French it said nose normal.
Really?
And that was in his ID, and that's how bloody mad they all were. That was his like Vichy Nazi ID. So he had a normal sized nose. By the way, I don't think his nose is normal. But it certainly wasn't later on. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So I just want to say one
uh,
thing, Martin, because I forgot to say it. We're joined today on the Austen Tayshus show by Philippe Mora, filmmaker, painter, intellectual, and obsessive anti-Nazi, obsessive obsessive Jew. You don't like that, actually. You don't like obsessive
let
Jew.
me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
Because about this, about obsessive.
Yeah. I know. I was just joking around.
Yeah. No, I know. I think any Jewish person who isn't interested in Nazis better get interested pretty fast, because I do think that all of that could happen again, and there's more anti-Semitism, unfortunately, now than ever before, and the former president here didn't help the situation with fanning the flames of racism, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah. So you're the guardian of the Jewish people, like I am. I'm a guardian of the Jewish people. So and we're in the front line. So and we all, I guess we always will be. I mean, that's. But I know that my mother always used to say that I was obsessive about the Holocaust. So we have discussed that. So, which I don't think.
Yeah,
I agree. I'm a historian.
It's a natural thing, and by the way, more information on what happened in the Second World War, particularly with the Holocaust, is coming out all the time. There's more information, and there's a reason why it's coming out all the time. The reason is that we don't know what happened, and all the reasons that we've been given for World War II, and they're all being debated right now by historians. No, was it Hitler? Were the Germans crazy to start with? Now, I don't know how deeply you want to get into this in the Austen Tayshus show, but one thing I've just discovered, which a lot of people who know about this, I didn't, is that there was a genocide of African blacks, a deliberate genocide, in the century before the Second World War, that was ordered basically by the Kaiser, and they wiped out a lot of tribes, and there were wars, and they just wiped them out, and the Germans were killing blacks by the millions, actually, and they're just researching all this now. So this racial killing, this genocidal thing, was occurring in Germany long before Hitler. So he was just the last one. Obviously, he was a good student on genocide, and by the way, when Hitler started this, he's on record twice. He's on record twice. Table talk and diaries and all this stuff. He said that no one's going to worry about murdering the Jews because they didn't worry about the Armenians. That was a quote, and so Hitler looked at the Armenians as to showing his cohorts. He said, look, they didn't do anything about the Armenians. There's 1 million Armenians killed, and he studied how the Germans had done that genocide on the Armenians. He studied it. He looked at the train timetables, and so.
Not the German, you mean the Turks.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You said the Germans.
I'm getting my genocides mixed up. But the Turks committed a genocide on the Armenians, which has only just been recognized, by the way, by the United States.
By Joe Biden, the other day.
Yeah, and so that's a really
was it Donald Trump? Was it Donald Trump?
No, it was. we don't. The jury's out on Donald Trump. Was he insane or just a nutcase?
Right.
Um,
That's right.
so, but anyway, I'm getting off track here. But Hitler used the Armenian genocide as an example of no one gives, no one's going to give a crap, pardon the language, about what we're doing with the Jews, because they didn't do anything to help the Jews when
Well, I
once
don't,
they started.
but I don't think anybody would have cared about the Jews anyway, because nobody does. So, and I think that's the case still today. I mean, I've been talking to people about this, about anti-Semitism, and about how it's an exclusive thing. It's not like any other racism, because people don't treat it that way. You know, I mean, obviously, racism towards African Americans, or racism towards the Chinese, or racism. I mean, that's all in the news right now, but they don't actually say, but what about anti-Semitism? You know, that's a bad thing. It's like it's considered something that's always there and not really to be too concerned about, because the Jews can take care of themselves.
Well, I did ask my dad about this later on. I said, what happened? What the hell was that all about? The Holocaust, because he was there, and obviously he was there, and he said, well, anti-Semitism. This is him talking, not me, but he was saying, he said anti-Semitism has always been there, and he said, let's call that normal anti-Semitism. But what the Nazis did was not normal anti-Semitism. What they did was genocidal, murderous anti-Semitism, which is a whole different thing. That he took it. Let's say he kicked it up to a level that was incomprehensible. And again, we don't know. Was this because he hated Jews? Is this because his mum had a Jewish doctor? I mean, there was so many theories, but the bottom line is we do not know, and what it was all about. And the tragedy, of course, is that no one helped the Jews at the time. I mean, now they're FDR, who's a hero to many people, including myself, by the way. I made a film about Brother Can You Spare a Dime. I made a film about FDR. I think he's a fantastic president, and he was key with Churchill, obviously, in defeating Hitler. But he didn't open the gates of America to the Jews on the run. And what he was worried about was the anti-Semites in America, which he was aware of, including the Ku Klux Klan and all that. So FDR didn't want to stir up. Well, this was his reasoning. He said he didn't let the Jews in because he didn't want to stir up anti-Semitism.
Well, everybody seems to have an excuse for why they didn't do anything. But the bottom line is, 6 million people died and certainly didn't have to die. So, I mean, you could have.
No, they were.
If every country would have taken.
We don't need. I mean, it's such an unpleasant subject, really. But the thing about it still that strikes me whenever I think about it, I think about it a lot because I do a lot of work on it. The really striking thing about it, it was the 2 million children that were gassed. That I just don't get that. I don't where beings can kill children. It's so barbaric. It's deep. It goes deep. I think,
Well, he explained.
the Homo sapiens were.
Himmler explained it by saying that they will grow up and they'll want to kill us. That's what he said.
Yeah, and that's what Hitler said too. He got it from Hitler. That Hitler said we have to kill the kids because otherwise they're going to come after us.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you actually have to do it, and they were having nervous breakdown. The Germans who were killing all these people for example, in Birkenau, Auschwitz. I'm not laughing, but it's so sick. I'm going. It's like my emotion is like, oh, geez, but the kids were killed because if we don't kill them, they'll come after us. And I'm sorry, I lost the thread of what I was going to say.
No. You were saying the people that were doing it were having nervous breakdowns.
Right. And so
like the Einsatzgruppen, like the Einsatzgruppen.
they couldn't deal with what they were doing, and they were having nervous breakdowns. And Himmler said, well, the solution is just give them a vacation. Don't get mad at them. So all the guys who were having nervous breakdowns had 2-week vacations in an adjoining spa or at Auschwitz. And there's photos, and those secretaries are laughing and they're having a great time. It looks like they're on a holiday. Well, they were on a holiday.
That's part of the Auschwitz album. Is that the one you talk? Those pictures you're talking about?
That's right.
With Mengele there, and all those all the top guys at probably Hearst, whatever, at Auschwitz.
Yeah, but Himmler used it as an example, saying give them vacations, because it also shows how humane we are, and we're really humane. The guys are very tough work, and there was a big speech, I guess, by Hitler in 43 or something. I don't know. It was in
Posen.
Yeah, the famous Posen speech, where he said, you've done a great job, everybody. You've done, but you can't talk about it. And you know what? You're never going to be able to talk about it. And you're heroes, because anyone who's done this, it takes so much strength. It takes so much strength to do what you did, and blah, blah, blah. So they went out of their way to make the murderers feel that they actually had done something good for the country. And all that's deep stuff, but
which is even more psycho fucking story.
It's the whole thing. It's completely psycho, and but
you know what intrigues me though? What intrigues me is that they could carry on as a country, and they could, like, right up until today, they could behave like so this was a weird aberrations that happened for 12 years. But then before that we were okay, and after that, and now we're going to be okay. But all their grandparents, all the people that they associated with as children, our generation, they were all murderers or complicit in murder or whatever it was. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were involved in this.
Well, look, can I introduce a very related subject, which is, I think, fascinating, which is, apropos Germans now and Jews now, is there's a theory that trauma changes DNA, not over billions of years, but it can, if it's traumatic enough, it can affect the DNA immediately. So that the trauma, so that second generation Jews and Germans some researchers believe, can be traumatized right now, not just from studying it, but actually traumatized in their DNA from the parents.
No, I certainly agree with that as far as the Jewish people are concerned. What I'm saying is, in which way have the Germans been traumatized?
Well, guilt and trying to figure out, that was my dad, that was my mum, and they killed those babies, and all that's just hard to do, because you look, I had an assistant, a German assistant here in LA, Michael, nice guy, won't mind me talking about this. He was a terrific guy. He got himself castrated because he didn't want to have children, because he thought they might be Nazis. He was a 22-year-old German guy. He was tormented. I said, I would have stopped him cutting his balls off, but he did. I mean, a doctor did it.
Did he do it in front of you?
And then he said, I said, I said, I understand you're tormented. You should be tormented, but I mean, was that necessary? He says, all of my friends have had vasectomies. I said, really? You mean obviously your male friends? How many friends have had vasectomies? He said, all of them. So there's a whole generation of German kids who were totally freaked. I met one guy.
How could they not bring those criminals to justice? And how could they wait so long? I mean, they're doing it now when the people are those criminals are 100, but they couldn't do it immediately post-war, and they couldn't. you know, they can't just blame the Americans and the Cold War and this and that. I mean, it's a whole country that was a bunch of criminals, and they did.
Look,
You
I
had to
don't.
have Beate Glasfeld running around and Simon Wiesenthal running around. Jewish people, or you know, Beate Glasfeld was a German but married to a Jew. But there they were running around catching Klaus Barbie, etc.
Look, I don't think there's any doubt that when the war ended, at least half the population were disappointed, were very upset, and they were Nazis, and now they had children and they told their kids, and so there's still an issue there.
Yeah, but it's a criminal country. It's a country full of criminals, the worst kind of criminals.
Well, statistically, I don't know the statistics, but there are a lot of Nazis were still there. By the way, look, this involved the whole world. You know about Operation Paperclip, where the Americans snatched all the Nazi scientists and brought them out here, including Werner von Braun. Yeah. And what irony that we then landed on the moon with Nazi technology.
Without Werner von Braun, you wouldn't have gone to the moon. It wouldn't have worked.
No. It's very Dr. Strangelove. And, we wouldn't have got to the moon. And we probably wouldn't have got to Mars recently if it hadn't been for all of that.
And he was in the SS too, that guy.
Yeah, Werner von Braun was in the SS. And it's very obviously terribly difficult to unpack all this because it's still going on. And we know that Nazi groups there are a lot of Nazis in Australia who fled to Australia. I remember coming back to Australia. I had been away for a while. I guess it was in the 70s, and there was a brief flurry in Australia when they found some Nazis, and the Attorney General of Australia at that point tried to arrest some and everything. And what I'm going to tell you now sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit, but I came back to Australia and I turned on the TV and they're interviewing a German guy. And he's saying, yeah, I was born in Alice Springs I think it was a long time ago, but I grew up in Alice Springs. Yeah, it's a beautiful city. And they were I know that in Victoria, where the Puffing Billy is, I know that area had a lot of Germans.
Well, the same in South Australia in the Adelaide Hills, but there was a flurry again in the 90s or late 80s where they started bringing them to trial, a few of these people.
Yeah, they did.
But I just mean a country of criminals continuing on and building that Germany up to where it is. I mean, it's enviable to all other countries in Europe now in terms of economically. It's a big economic miracle. They rebuilt the country. They got great buildings and everything. The infrastructure is so great and they're so proud of themselves. But in that whole time, they didn't bring all these animals to justice.
Look, you and I have discussed this previously before, and I'm a little softer on this than you in that I don't think every single German is a murderer.
No, I don't think so either. But there's a lot. There was a lot of them who escaped. But there was a lot who escaped prosecution.
A lot, no question. And some were helped immeasurably by various administrations worldwide.
And the Vatican.
Well, that's a whole other scandal. That's a huge.
Anyway, we're not going to just talk about Nazis though. Well, let's talk about. So George goes to France. He joins the resistance eventually, and then he became a hero in the resistance. And your mum. Because this is about you, really. This podcast. I mean, and it might be 2 or 3 parts anyway. So, but your mum.
I should have put some makeup on. But look,
you look handsome. You look very handsome.
Oh, thank you.
But Merca's story that's an interesting story though, from the train so she was in Drancy. Was that
Merca's story?
Huh?
Drancy? No. No, it's called Pithier, and then she was in a transit camp.
In,
Look,
in
I'll
France,
rush through
in
her
France,
story.
in France.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So she was, yeah. So she was. Jews in Paris were all arrested in 1942, I think it was. They swept all the Jews up in Paris because they knew who they were. They had to wear yellow stars. And so my mum's dad, my grandfather, was an antique dealer, and he had gold coins. So he went to the transit camp that she was in, and the Nazis were always open to corruption, and he bought them out with gold coins, his family. So Merker the next day would have been on a train to Auschwitz, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But so he got them out. But what I want to say is that her father was part of the French resistance, and in the French resistance organization, there was something called OSE. It's kind of important in the history of this. OSE is the initials. My French is terrible, I'm ashamed to say. Well, Secours des Enfants. This is interesting. It was a Jewish organization started in Berlin in the 1920s. Chairman Albert Einstein. And Einstein comes into my family history again because he is my dad's professor at Berlin University in physics when my dad was doing studying medicine. So Einstein is my dad's professor. Then Einstein had to get out of Germany fast because he was number one Jew, by the way, to Hitler. He was the top of the list of the Jews they wanted to get. He was symbolically number one Jew. And so he flees to the United States. And then only recently we found documents of in my father's file in Auxerre in Paris, which still exists. But Einstein was actively raising money in America to help the Jewish children, and specifically the operation my father was in. Einstein was funding my father's operation to save Jewish kids in south of France. And there's letters from Einstein to the head of Auxerre. Sorry, he was the head of Auxerre, to other people in Auxerre, saying, I've asked the Warburg Bank in New York if they'll fund the operation. This is not long before, but probably a year and a half before it was widely known that the Nazis were killing Jews. But in the letter, in these letters, Einstein knows. He's saying they're killing Jews. We need money. He says they're killing children. The parents are in Auschwitz. Einstein knew the whole thing, and he was doing whatever he could to help, which is mind-boggling to me. I mean, we know Einstein's so famous for many, many reasons, but I didn't know that he was actively involved in raising money to save children. And so, and actively involved in saving the children that my dad was protecting. So that's just it was mind-blowing to me when I saw all these documents. And then after the war, my dad started a factory in Paris for the children who had survived Belsen. My dad actually started a shoe factory before he got to Australia. Started a shoe factory with Jewish kids making the shoes. And so within that organization, Merker had heard about my dad. And my dad's buddy, my dad's mate, one of his mates then in the operation was Marcel Marceau. And Marcel Marceau introduced Merker to my dad.
Oh,
he knew
really?
both of them. He knew them before they knew each other.
Right.
And Merker was at the Jean-Louis Barrault School of Mime. And Marceau was her teacher. And Marceau was the the Cupid introducing my dad to my mum, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So
but eventually she was put on that train, wasn't she, to Auschwitz?
She was on the train to the transit camp, Pithier. Right. It's called Pithier. Pithier. So
It was on its own.
my
That's when she jumped
grandfather
off.
went to that camp. He got them out. The next day she would have been in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And
No,
then,
but
then
subsequently, wasn't she sent somewhere and she jumped away?
yeah,
Jumped
it's a
off the plane?
transit camp. It was a transit camp.
Oh, okay.
And then the resistance, again, the French resistance, because my grandfather was all part of it, hid or arranged for the family to be hidden in the country outside of Paris. And you know, in Israel, in Yad Vashem, my Hebrew is as bad as my French. But anyway, Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem.
Yeah, they have. There's the something of the righteous,
the garden of the righteous. Yeah.
Of the righteous, and the righteous are people who help Jews,
who were not
Gentiles,
righteous Gentiles who helped.
Yeah,
Jews
exactly. And so they're the farmer family, the family that hid Merker and her sisters and my grandmother, are celebrated in Israel in that thing, that the righteous. So Merker's in there. So all that was all.
There's not many people there, by the way, in the Garden of the Righteous.
No, I want to go and check it out.
Well, there's not many people there, but Oscar Schindler is in there. Oscar Schindler is in there.
Really? Hmm.
Yeah, Schindler's there.
Yeah.
Well, he saved 1,000. He saved 1,000 people. So.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's a whole other story. Obviously, a painful one, really. There was the fellow in the south of France who saved many more. There are a lot of righteous who saved many more than Schindler.
Oh, yeah.
Schindler's wife,
like Raoul Wallenberg, who disappeared. But,
yeah, incredible.
And
then the guy, Vivian,
Japanese guy,
someone called Vivian, who got all the artists out, Max Ernst and all those people. Yeah, he got them out from the south of France. Right. But look, you know, the whole thing's a sorry tale, obviously.
Anyway, both your parents survived, and let's move along. So both your parents survived, and they managed to come to Australia, and they arrived in Australia in what year? Well, you were already born, weren't you? You're born in 49. They were already
51. Yeah, 51.
They came here in 51, and you're already like 2 years old, basically.
Yeah.
And that's when they set up in Little Collins Street or Collins Street. Is that where it was?
Well, we first lived in McKinnon, in outside of Melbourne, and I remember it because there was a garden. I used to collect snails, not to eat, although they're good to eat, but I didn't eat them. But I used to collect snails. I remember very, very well. Then my parents, they were city people, so they decided they want to live in the city. That's how they got to Collins Street. Ironically called the Paris end of Collins Street even then. And the building that they found a studio in had actually been a famous artist's building. And some of the big, I should know this, but you know, like people like Arthur Street and even famous names like that from the last century had been in the studio. And so what happened after that was well documented. The artists and the bohemians of Melbourne flocked to my mum and dad. They'd never seen anything like it, and they were European and they were Jewish emigres, and so it became a scene, what we now call a scene. And no one had any money, and my mother was very famous for having invented parsley soup, which they fed all these artists with parsley soup, and then there were so many parties. And as a kid, I loved the parties because people would they'd conk out, sleep on the floor. And in the morning, I'd go down and collect money, because if money would fall out of people's pockets when they conked out. So we loved the parties. So then there were so many parties, and that my dad said to Merker, look, we ought to start a cafe, so at least we can make some money out of this. And because I'm going broke. I was feeding all these people, even though it's just parsley soup most of the time. So he starts the Merca Cafe with Merca,
And that was
just down the street.
Was that in Collins Street?
The Exhibition Street.
Right.
The Merca Cafe was an Exhibition Street, and my dad was selling instant chicken soup, Maggi chicken soup, and then he knew about espresso and coffee machines, and which was a totally new thing in Melbourne. My dad said he just couldn't believe it when he had a cup of coffee in Melbourne the first time. It wasn't coffee; it was like sort of hot water, brown hot water. It was ridiculous. Anyway, so he bought a espresso machine, imported an espresso machine at the same time as Pellegrini's imported an espresso machine up the road. And I remember very clearly as a kid, when the Pellegrinis or my parents ran out of coffee, I'd have to go with the coffee. So I was between the two places all the time.
Yeah.
And Pellegrini's looked exactly the same then as it looks now, that bar and thing. And so that was, and then my dad and Merca, it was more my dad being the food gourmet, invented the Exhibition Street open sandwich. And there was just an open sandwich. And there was the theater across the street was the Comedy Theater. And in walks into the Merca Cafe, because it's across the street, in walks Melvyn Douglas, this Hollywood star. And he's there because he's doing Private Lives, Noel Coward. And he's basically blacklisted. So what do you do when you're blacklisted? You go to Melbourne. Yeah. And so that's what he did. So I remember him very well. And he loved my mum and dad. He was a very left-wing guy.
For people who don't know, he was the father in HUD, in the movie HUD. He was the lover in Ninochka, and he was the senator in Being There. Just
great Hollywood.
You know some other, hey?
Well, no, great Hollywood star. I mean, the credits are the credits are huge.
Yeah.
So we would spend, mum and dad would spend. I remember this is embarrassing to relate this one, but I remember we went to Portsea once with him, and there's a home movie of me trying to kick his head in, but he's lying down. I don't know. I was like a little bastard. I mean, I don't know how old I was, 7. I don't know. But he's lying down next to my dad at Portsea, and they're sunbathing. And I suddenly race in and kick him in the head. It was terrible. But so obviously I was unimpressed with Hollywood even then.
With Ninochka, you didn't like Ninochka.
Yeah. I did. So that was fascinating. And then Catherine Hepburn. My parents was whatever they did.
What was Catherine Hepburn? You haven't told me the Catherine Hepburn story.
Oh, Catherine Hepburn. She came in with Robert Helpman. She came in, and because it was the only place where you could get a European sandwich, so she came in with him.
What was she doing in Australia? Was she doing a play here?
I don't remember that bit.
Right. But they did come here a lot in the 40s and 50s.
I think they're doing theatre. They're doing plays. There was money.
Laurence Olivier toured with Vivien Leigh. That's where they picked up Peter Finch, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Frank Thring. No. Frank Thring. Sorry. Frank Thring. What am I doing? So Frank Thring. No, thanks. Frank Thring said that it was also the only place in Melbourne at the time where gay men and women could hang out. The
Yeah.
Mocha Cafe was known as a bohemian place. So that attracted a whole milieu of the theatrical, the theatre people.
Yeah.
And not that all the theatre people are gay, of course, but the thing is, my parents were very welcoming and to everybody.
Of course.
And then the big thing from all, apropos all that, was when On the Beach was made in Melbourne. And by then they'd started a restaurant called the Balzac, or as Patrick White described it, the Balzac. And so the Balzac was
the Balzac.
Yeah. So there's another, very Patrick White. So there's another big deal was my dad got the first liquor license in Melbourne for a restaurant, but you couldn't drink with your meal. My dad went to a judge and he said, look, I come from Europe, my wife comes from Europe, and the thing is the Olympic Games are coming up, and I assure you, Your Honor, everyone coming from Europe is going to expect to have a drink with their meal.
Yeah.
And the judge famously said, Mr. Mora, I'm going to give you the license number 001, and I want you to know I'd like a drink with my meal myself. And it was phenomenal. And I'd come home from school, and I'd have dinner with Ava Gardner and Anthony Perkins and the whole cast. And Gregory Peck. I mean, it was an amazing cast. Fred Astaire.
Yeah, Stanley Kramer.
What? Stanley Kramer. Yeah, and so it was a very exciting. Look, I had a very privileged, in retrospect, privileged childhood.
It was very bohemian, and also, and then you met. Then you got involved with all the Heidi people as well, didn't you? She did, or they did.
Well, Sunday Reid, the Reids were introduced. John Sunday Reid were introduced to my parents, and Sunday and Merca, that was a lifetime love affair that went on forever. And same with my dad. My dad too. It was a big love affair with the Reids, John Reid and my dad. It's incredible, really. I don't know where he got all this fight from, but he immediately said that the Australian artists who he knew and who were visiting us all the time, who are now, by the way, all the most famous Australian artists, but were totally unknown when they were eating the parsley soup. But he immediately started telling the Australian government, Menzies, Prime Minister, that Australian art was really good and it should be shown. These artists, Charles Blackman, John Percival, Arthur Boyd, Sidney Nolan, these artists should be shown in Europe. Well, that mightn't sound very revolutionary now, but at the time it was really a big deal. And so he said, we need to start the Museum of Modern Art of Australia. And my dad, with John and Sunday Reid, was instrumental in raising the money and creating the Museum of Modern Art of Australia. And he tells a story
about that now. Is that the National? Is that the National Gallery of Victoria? No,
that it's the Heidi Museum of Modern Art of Australia. Right, yeah. That's in Heidelberg. It's a fantastic museum specializing in those artists. Joy Hest,
Albert Tucker,
that generation, Percival, Albert Tucker.
Yeah,
Albert Tucker lived on top. I'm not expressing this properly, but he lived on top of us in 9 Collins Street, and I recall breaking into his studio. I obviously was really a problem, but anyway, I was a little kid, broke into his studio because it was just above us in 9 Collins Street, and we opened a drawer, and there were photos, maybe a dozen photos of women with huge breasts, naked. And
hold on a second.
I thought it was a funny.
Can he say that? Is that can you say that on the podcast? Yep. Yeah, it's okay. Yep.
Oh, okay. Breasts.
Yeah. No, I wasn't sure whether you can say big breasts on the podcast, but we've got a guy.
Oh, right.
we've got the moderator here. He's okay. He's okay.
Oh,
The
good.
big press okay. Yeah, he's got it himself. He said so. Yeah.
So I wrote on one of the photos, "Dear Bert, it's over between us. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Fuck you, Cheryl." And I seriously thought that he wouldn't know it was me, that the Mora boys. I seriously thought so good, my writing. Anyway, of course, Bert went he went berserk. He called the police. The police arrived, and I got an absolute dressing down. And the detectives, they were really trying not to laugh when they said to me, "You know what the giveaway was, mate?" I said, "No. Said, there is no Cheryl. He doesn't know anyone called Cheryl." You blew it. And
what did your father think of that?
Well, they were embarrassed, It was embarrassing, the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
So it was like they sympathised with.
Wasn't encouraging.
They sympathised with Albert.
Wasn't encouraging.
Yeah, but they
wasn't encouraging.
Right.
Yeah, and my dad had been instrumental in getting him back to Australia, which was even more embarrassing because he had been living in Europe, and my dad raised the money to get him back because he thought he was a good Australian artist.
Yeah.
We all were very, very close, and ultimately, and
so you spent a lot of time with all of those people, with Sidney Nolan, with Albert Tucker, with Joy Hester, with Sunday Reid, John Reid, Sweeney.
Well, all of them except Nolan, who had already left Australia. But Joy Hester, for example, was our babysitter, and her famous incident as being our babysitter was she gave my brother William a sack of rat poison to eat by accident. These artists were not made out to be babysitters.
Really?
So Willie was okay, we think, but he survived.
What did she think? Did she think he was a dirty rat? Or?
Actually, look, I've misspoken because she didn't give it to him. He found it.
Oh,
okay, he found it in the shed.
While she was supposed to be babysitting.
Yeah. And the neighbors there were Charles Blackman. I remember him running around with a gun, shooting at crows.
Yeah.
And I remember her husband, Gray Smith, who was a character himself. He said, I remember him saying to me, in bacon, sometimes there's little bits of, it looks like bone, but it looks like a tooth, bacon.
Yeah.
And I was eating that there in the house. Joy had just made it. And Gray Smith said, looks like you're losing your teeth, mate, to me, which was terrifying to me. Yeah, he said, I'm going to have to pull them all out now. Every one of them. Yeah, no, God. And then Joy said, Gray, she went ballistic on him. And then he said, oh, okay, look, I just saw, there's a snake out there. I just saw this snake. We're going to chop it up. Come with me. It makes me go with him. And there was like a tiger snake on the balcony, or not the balcony, but just outside the house. And he picks up this axe, and he chops up the snake, like into I don't know, 8 pieces, And these are traumatic memories because the snakes keep moving. So it was an eventful bohemian childhood.
So which led you, obviously, you were infiltrated with Bohemia and the lust for for showbiz, for all that stuff, the associated, the movies, the art, the whatever. And so your first venture into that field was you made a short film, didn't you? You made a short film?
Well, look, a couple of things. My dad really encouraged me, and he bought me an 8mm camera, and then later on he bought me a 16mm camera. And
Right.
it turned out he wanted to be a filmmaker, and incredibly, when he was at Berlin University, his landladies in Berlin were Erich von Stroheim's sisters.
Right.
And he said they would show him letters from Hollywood. And they'd say, look, this is our famous brother. Your famous brother. Hey, look.
Evie.
Yeah.
So he was in wasn't he in a very early wasn't von Stroheim in a very early Ernst Lubitsch?
Yeah, no, not Lubitsch, but he directed himself. Foolish Wives.
Oh, right.
Excuse me.
That was a silent movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he became he was a great actor, but he's in that Renoir movie about the First World War.
Oh, La Grande Illusion.
Yeah, he's in that. He's in that.
Right,
I thought he was fantastic.
And he's a Jew. He was a Jew, wasn't he? Erich von Stroheim.
Yeah, they're all Jewish. They put von in front of their names because they could get hired as German advisors when they did that. Like Joseph von Sternberg.
Yeah. Right. Erich von Stroheim.
Sternberg. So Sternberg came to Melbourne in '66. Could have been '67. There was a retrospective of his films at the Palais in St Kilda.
Yeah.
And my father invited him to open an exhibition of Merker's paintings at the gallery, the Talana Gallery. So Stroheim, I was a film buff. I knew all about him.
But Sternberg.
Sternberg. I'm sorry, Sternberg.
Yeah.
Von Sternberg. So he comes to Talana, Sternberg, and mother, of course, like Merker was very, embarrassing to us as a mother. That's what I was wanting to, because you don't, as a kid, you want to conform.
Yeah.
You don't want to have some wild mother. You just want to be like all the other kids. So we'd tell Merker what to wear. If you pick me up, you pick me up with the grey dress, the white shirt, the black jacket. And she's got notes from me where I'd written that down for her to see before. Anyway, so Sternberg, Merker saying, "Oh, my son makes movies." And I'm saying, "Please, Mum." And Merker, "No, my son's a genius making movies. You must show Mr. von Sternberg your film now." And Sternberg says, "Well, what sort of film is it?" It was called Man in a Film. I said, "It's called Man in a Film." I said, "It was inspired by Fellini." And I said, "There's this Fellini scene where he whips a girl on a cross." And Sternberg perks up at this. He says, "Wait a minute. So you made a film inspired by Fellini, and there's a whipping scene of a woman on a cross? I'd like to see that." So we go to my room. We're in Talana. We had the whole hotel, and so I lace up Man in a Film. It's starring Sweeney Reed, who's the son of Albert Tucker. Small world. And so I can't believe this actually, as I'm telling you, because Sternberg is sitting right next to me, and I'm showing on 8mm this thing, and there's Sweeney pretending to whip and it's all ham acting because we're kids, and she's going, "Oh," and Sternberg's like completely deadpan. And it's like a 10-minute movie.
It seemed like an eternity, probably.
The light. Yeah, I didn't know. I mean, I was out of my depth, but so anyway, I turned the lights on, and Sternberg says, "Very interesting. And your mother says you're also a painter?" I said, "Yes." And Sternberg says, "It's so nice to have done this." He says, "Well, can I see some of your paintings?" And I said, "Well, there's some there." And as I recall, it was a painting of Dr. Verwoerd, who no one's ever heard of now, the South African racist Verwoerd, who was shot, who was assassinated. And there's a painting there with with his shot with his blood coming out of his head, with and I said, that's a painting of the assassination of Dr. Verwoerd. And Sternberg says, well, after having seen your film and looking at that, my advice to you is stick to film. Stick to film. Very good.
And a good sense of humor. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So
we had.
What was your So after Man in a Film, what was your next project?
A Day in the Life of Charles Blackman.
Right.
Which was a 16 mil, big time.
A documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a documentary. And I've these films, by the way, are all at the they're at the National Archives. They kept copies of them, which is great.
Yeah.
At the same time, I just found a letter from Gary Shedd, the painter. I just found a letter from Gary Shedd saying to me, talking about a film we were going to make together, and thank you for your thoughts and blah blah blah. We were great mates because he was making films too, actually.
I remember that. I remember his films. They were so experimental films. He used to put them into the Sydney Film Festival. I used to see his films, Gary Shedd.
Yeah, Ned Kelly. He made a Ned Kelly film.
Yeah.
We were really
fun. There was that guy, Russell Mulcahy, made a lot of films for that, and Albie Toms and
Albie Toms, yeah.
And
Russell was young.
All those films got screened in competition at the Sydney Film Festival in the late '60s, early '70s. Anyway, so your next thing, your first main film was already when you were in England, wasn't it? The Trouble in Melopolis, was that over there?
Yeah.
What inspired you to go to England? What inspired you to go to England?
Well, that's what you did in those days. I mean, my whole generation, England was, the mother country, and my whole generation, everyone went to England. I mean, there's a whole slew of Aussies who ended up in London. You know the names: Barry Humphries and Clive James and Jermaine Greer and Martin Sharp and
Richard Neville.
Yeah, Richard Neville. And then my dad said, look, because there was no film school or anything. You're talking about 1966, 67.
Yeah.
So my dad encouraged me. He said, you know what, you can stay with the Anschels, who are good friends of ours. You can stay there, and you've got so many friends there. The Blackman, all the people who had been in 9 Collins Street were in London. The Blackmans, the Percivals, the Boyds, they're all there. I'd grown up with them. They're all friends of mine. So you go to London, you've got a lot of friends there. And he really encouraged me. He said,
what age were you then? What age were you, Philippe? 18?
17.
17. But that's fairly young to just go away, isn't it?
Well, not really.
Well, all those people you mentioned, they were like Jermaine and Clive James, Barry, they were all 10 or 15 years older than you.
They were, but the family friends, like the Percival kids and Jamie Boyd, this Arthur Boyd, son, they were my age, and it was Arthur Boyd. Well, I ended up staying with Martin Sharp because he'd stayed with us at Aspendale. He'd stayed with our family at Aspendale. Merca called Martin her 4th son, and so did George, by the way. He was family. And so he said, oh, you can stay, come on over, you can stay with me. So when I first this is the short version. So I lived with the Anschels for a while in Hampstead, and then saw all our friends who I filmed. And then was in Hampstead for a while. Then Martin said, come on over. And then I didn't know I was just stepping right into swinging London, because Martin lived in the Pheasantry and his roommate was Eric Clapton. And so I'm right in the middle of it. So I arrived there and I'm living suddenly with Eric Clapton, who was not a superstar then, but was on his way, and Martin. And that was wild. I mean, we like, for example, the Living Theatre showed up at the Pheasantry for a while. Like 40 of them were sleeping on the floor. but the Living Theatre was a avant-garde theatre company from America. And the Pheasantry became a salon. It became a with celebrities coming up all the time. Mick Jagger was up there all the time. George Harrison was there. Mick Jagger wasn't there all the time, just a couple of times. But George Harrison was often there because he was very close to Eric. And I was painting. Eric was playing his guitar, and Martin was doing cream covers. And there's a guy called R.D. Laing, a psychiatrist. Became famous because he said there's no such thing as insanity.
Yeah.
That really that triggered us. We thought, yeah, that's right. There's no such thing as insanity, and everyone's crazy. And he would come up and study us. He would come up to the studio. He was an older guy, older than us, and he'd sit in a corner and make notes. Like, if Martin went to have a piss, he'd write Martin Sharp, 11:15, urinates. And because he was a scientist, and he liked us. And then
so George Harrison was there. George Harrison was there quite a bit. And
yeah, and years later, in LA, I caught up with Eric, and George was standing next to him, and this is amazing, really. And George says, "Oh, Philippe, yeah, hi. The blue door, man, the blue door." I said, what blue door is it? He said, "The blue door at the Pheasantry." And I'd completely forgotten that the door was a bright blue, Martin Sharp, bright blue door, Martin had. And George remembered the whole thing better than me, better than I remembered it. And
so you were very, very close to George as well, is that right? You were very close.
Well, I wasn't close to him, but I was a fan.
So
and then, in fact, I did the illustrated. They asked me to do some illustrations for the Beatles illustrated lyrics, so which I did. I Am the Walrus. Yeah. I don't know whether you ever saw those. So that was a kick, and so
Germaine Greer was there, and she was in your first movie, though, wasn't she? In The Trouble with Malopolis.
She wasn't just there. She was living just underneath us in the Pheasantry,
right,
studios.
Right. And that was about the time of the female unit.
Well, when I was filming Trouble in Malopolis, I cast her as one of the main roles, filming her, and she'd say to me, "Look, how long is this going to take? Because I'm writing this book, I've got to get back." And I said, she said, "Can we do it tomorrow?" I'd say, "What?" So it was very informal. And yeah, she was writing the book as we shot Trouble in Malopolis.
And so she was the lead in that, was she?
She's like number 3.
And so what is it about Trouble in Malopolis?
It's a Brechtian. It's like the Threepenny Opera. I was very involved with Bertolt Brecht at the time, yeah. And so was Peter Smalley, who wrote it with me, and he went on to write a whole lot of stuff. Now he's quite a renowned author, would you believe, of naval books, ships, not staring at your navel, but so British naval sagas, yeah. And very successful at those. And so we wrote. So Bertolt. So let me tell you this quickly. So it's about a crazy mayor. Now, this was my first film, and I had this idea that since this guy is crazy, why don't we get a real lunatic to be the star of the movie, like a real clinically insane man. And this is, the climate at the time, the 60s, right? Anything goes. So they found this guy who was crazy, who'd just been let out of a mental asylum. But he was incredibly verbal. And he'd say things like, "I want to suck the marrow from your bones," and weird stuff. And so John Ivor Golding, and then he took off. He took off with a gold bowler hat, and the Chelsea police called us. They said, we have a guy in a gold bowler hat we found in the street. He says he's a movie star and call you. And so we bailed him out. And then the first day of the shoot, I don't know whether I told you the story, but it's a shocker really. But the first day of the shoot, there's at the lunch break, the assistant director comes to me and he says, oh, look, we've got a problem. John Ivor Golding has just done a shit in the middle of the set. I said, well, I said, well, clean it up and don't tell anyone. I'll speak to him. And just clean it up. I said, please, I beg you, clean it up. I'll deal with this. So I go to this guy and I say, John, you must use the toilets. If you're going to be in this film, you must use the toilets. He says, oh, have I inconvenienced you? I said, yes, you've inconvenienced all of us. Oh, sorry. And then he was used the toilets from then on. Cut to the film opens at a venue called the Other Cinema, Other Cinema. He showed, and John Ivor Golding comes to the premiere and promptly defecates in the front seat of the cinema, sitting next to Eric Clapton, who seats up. So we have to pull him out, take him out, we get him out of there.
Yeah.
Would you believe that The Guardian, Derek Malcolm, still a prominent film writer, Derek Malcolm, he says, Trouble in Melopolis, new film by independent director, young man, Philippe Mora, amateurish in some respects, but very interesting in others, and a brilliant performance by newcomer as a lunatic by John Ivor Golding. I thought, well, geez, I thought my theory was right. My theory was right. Get a lunatic to play a lunatic, but I didn't do it again. I told that story later to a couple of actors. I told it to Dennis Hopper and Alan Arkin and Ryan. I told them that story about, he's just done a shit in the middle of the set. And Dennis said, oh, Philippe, don't tell that story to actors. Don't say that story. They're all going to think you think we're crazy and we're going to shit in the set. I said, no, I'm not. No, I don't mean that at all. I know, but don't tell that story to actors. And he was adamant. And then I thought he was, exaggerating. And then I did tell a story. I told the story again to Alan Arkin. And Arkin said, oh, God, why'd you don't tell that story to people? And then the only other time I've encountered that is when I said to Ryan O'Neill, name dropping, I'm very good name dropper. I said to Ryan O'Neill, oh, what Dorothy Parker said? She said, scratch an actor and you'll find an actress. And Ryan O'Neill says, oh, don't say that to him. What do you mean by that? And then he called me. The next morning he calls me. What did you mean by that, Philippe? Scratch an actor and you'll find an actress. Are you saying that I'm an actress? I said, no, right. I just thought it was funny. I just thought it was very funny. And
anyway, listen.
Anyway,
we're gonna
John Ivor Golding.
For Philippe, we're gonna have to wind this up now, and then we'll pick it up. We'll do second and third parts of your career because obviously there's a lot to talk about and there's a lot of anecdotes. But we got somebody else we have to do in a little while now. So, but it's been great.
Man.
It's been great, huh? What?
Onwards.
Yeah.
No, onwards.
No, onwards, but no, it's okay. But that's good. So it'll be Philippe Mora part 1, part 2, part 3, whatever. But we'll pick it up again in a few days. So, but that was a great talk, great chat. We got a lot of lovely stuff there. So,
hey, delighted to do it, mate.
Yeah,
and thank you.
No, it's a real pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, mate. But I'll just let you know when we're going to do the second part.
Let me know. Terrific. To be continued.
And thank your son for helping us.
I will. Oh, he's gone. Yeah, I will.
Speak soon.
Thank you.
All right, mate.
Thank you. Thank you very much.